Welcome to Dragons-Fireside. I'm your host, Cameron, and this is Episode 1, Ethnocentrism and Its Consequences, courtesy of my anthropology professor. I'm joined today with my friend Austin.
Hello.
As the title might suggest, we're talking about ethnocentrism and the effect it has on communities. So, Austin, what do you know about ethnocentrism? Do you know what it is, or should I start there?
I would say you should start there because I have no idea.
So, essentially, ethnocentrism is when we evaluate other cultures based on the standards that we're used to. For example, if we were to look at the Civil War and their viewpoints on slavery, knowing what we know now, and make judgments on their character based on their stance on the issues of their time. Now, we know that that probably isn't fair to do so, and yet, out of habit, that's where we naturally gravitate.
Okay, that makes a good bit of sense, actually.
With that in mind, I looked into a book called The Collected Schizophrenias by, forgive me if I butcher the name, Esme Weijun Wang. To briefly summarize, Wang essentially discusses her initial encounters with the medical system following the onset of her mental illness. She describes misdiagnosis and conflicting assessments, like the challenges and frustrations she faced in navigating a healthcare system that often failed to provide accurate diagnosis or effective treatment for mental illness, the fear of isolation of early psychosis, the vivid and disturbing hallucinations and delusions she experienced, and the profound sense of isolation and detachment from reality that accompanied them. There's also the stigma surrounding mental illness, and the discrimination she faced both from healthcare professionals and the general public added to her emotional distress. And there's also the struggle for acceptance and self-understanding. Her journey, it explored her journey towards accepting her diagnosis and finding ways to manage her condition, highlighting the importance of self-advocacy and finding support in other communities. Does any of this sound at all familiar with your experiences, or do you have any experiences that you'd like to share?
Um, Actually, that kind of does sound like eerily similar to a lot of the stuff that I've dealt with. Um,
And just for context, what's your issue?
well, in terms of um, hallucinations and whatnot, doctors haven't really come to like a concrete diagnosis. It's kind of been like I think I've been to four separate doctors, and they've all said different things. Like I think the first doctor said they thought it was schizoaffective disorder, and then the second doctor thought it was borderline personality disorder, and then I think the third one thought it was like miniature seizures in my brain that were like weak enough that it didn't cause me to lose consciousness, but like affected my perception of reality. I don't know. It's been like years of like psychiatry appointments and trying all sorts of antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-convulsion, like what feels like every medication under the sun, and then they still like the meds just don't work, and then it feels like the doctors either don't care enough to try, or maybe they just don't know enough about particular things, and I don't know, it becomes a very frustrating experience. And um, in regards to the psychosis and hallucinations that the author was talking about, it is very isolating. Like it kind of, not kind of, it does completely alter your perception of reality. In that, when you are experiencing delusions and hallucinations, like constantly or even regularly, it kind of just takes away from how real anything else around you feels. and it just starts to feel like you're the only person that's actually really here, and it's just you and whatever hallucinations you're dealing with, and it can be very rough to deal with. And so I did feel empathetic for the author uh, when she was talking about that.
Yeah, that's got to be a really like rough thing to deal with. And obviously, I don't have the same experience, but I think you mentioned something about not being able to differentiate between what was real or what wasn't, and being able to differentiate between reality and your own hallucinations. I think Wang mentioned something about in her own personal account of something like Cotard's delusion, where she believed herself dead for months. And I don't know that you experienced the same exact thing, but that's I don't know, that came to mind while you were talking. It just seems like something that would be really, really, really hard to deal with. But thanks for sharing your experiences.
Yeah, no problem.
We, I do think that it's time to move on to the next thing, because I have to relate for this project. I have to relate to two of the things we've gone over for the semester. Uh, I also listened to another podcast for one of my weekly readings, which is how we're uh, pulling uh, articles and things to relate to. But the episode of the podcast was called "The Power of Categories" by Invisibilia. Essentially, it explored how humans categorize themselves and others, and how these categories shape our lives. The main points are the need for categories, why the, the episode discusses a study in which people were asked to categorize themselves, and the results showed that people were more likely to categorize themselves based on their social identities, i.e., race, gender, religion, than on their other identities like hobbies, interests. This suggests, based on the podcast, that categories provide a way for us to feel connected to others and to understand our place in the world. It also discusses the harm of categories, where in the study there was another study in which people were asked to read a job description. The job description was identical for two different versions of the study, except that the gender of the applicant was changed. The results showed that people were more likely to rate the male applicant as being more competent and qualified for the job than the female applicant. This suggests that categories can lead to prejudice and or discrimination. And it also mentions the other category is the need for more nuanced understanding of categories. The episode concluded by calling for a more nuanced understanding of categories, and why we need to recognize that categories are not always accurate or helpful, and that they can actually sometimes be harmful. Uh, do you have any thoughts on that, or uh, have anything to relate that back to ethnocentrism, as I explained it earlier?
Um, I think that's actually pretty interesting. I don't know that I really thought about that before. Um, I guess I don't know. Maybe I don't think about topics like this very often or something, but I think it is interesting to see how people categorize themselves because I think it shows a lot about like subconscious bias, I guess, because I thought it was interesting to see the in regards to the job application that people were more biased towards the male applicant, even though it was completely identical except for a male versus female in a little box. So I think that was interesting to see.
I really thought so too. Um, Identity isn't something that I generally think of on the day to day basis. That might be because I'm pretty secure in where I think I should be categorized, but I know that is something like a lot of people struggle with, and uh, I know that when we do like categorize people, when we do like make these generalizations, oftentimes we can lose sight of the bigger picture of it, and we tend to focus more on the individual boxes that we're setting things into, rather than the person as a whole. Well, because I think we're getting a little lost in our own trying to explain things and relate things back to ethnocentrism, I think we're gonna wrap up here real quick. That, and I don't want to make a 15-minute video for an assignment, but uh, in general, I think both sources suggest that our tendency to categorize can be harmful when applied to complex concepts like mental health and or cultural identity. And I think like recognizing the limitations of our own cultural lens can become we can if we recognize the limitations of our own cultural lens, we can become like more open-minded and hopefully more respectful for other diverse communities and even our own communities. You got anything to add or close with?
Sounds good to me.
All right, thanks for coming.
No
Bye.
problemo.